So over the weekend, an attempted mutiny occurred in Russia. Things kicked off on Friday when Yevgeny Prigozhin, the leader of a private Russian military company known as Wagner Group, released a video criticizing Russia's war efforts. The next day, the Wagner army was on its way to Moscow, and Putin mobilized his own troops to defend against this armed rebellion. And then, in a surprise turn of events, Mr. Prigozhin announced he was turning back around after agreeing to relocate to Belarus. Now, the question is, how does this affect the markets? The short answer is we don't know. We're recording this before market open on Monday, but we still wanted to discuss what to expect in the weeks ahead. So, Scott, let's just break this down from a market's perspective. What should we be paying attention to as this news unfolds?
So, first off, this is just, there really is a butterfly effect. It's the stuff that the world is just this series of unexpected events. It's a total random walk. I don't think I can, in my wildest dreams, contemplate an analyst predicting this, that a mercenary army, which, by the way, reflects weakness on the part of the Russian military, that it needs a mercenary army to begin with, turns around and starts marching back and is threatening to wreak violence and deliver chaos to its native country that it's supposed to be fighting for. And then I find that the most interesting thing of all of this was that they went into Rostov-on-Don and they faced no resistance. Yep. It reminds me of when the U.S. got out of Iraq and Afghanistan, and just the forces there just took over. Just didn't, the forces that we had trained and put up there just fell right away. Mm-hmm. And that struck me as just really telling about how weak Putin is right now. So the obvious stuff, and then just to continue on that, had to negotiate with this trader, basically cut a deal, which I find this, I can't even wrap my head around how extraordinary this is. And I think a lot of people are saying that this is the beginning of the end again for Putin. We'll see. In terms of the markets, the stuff that seems sort of obvious, and that's not to say that it'll happen, but the stuff that we'll start to see a lot of conjecture around is that you'll see food and grain and oil prices probably go up. If the supply chain out of Russia gets disrupted or there's volatility there, you can see crude oil futures accelerate. You can see food and grain markets more unstable. You'll see the ruble has already started to decline. The question, or the more interesting question, is what are the second order effects? And this is total conjecture, but I would bet the big losers here on a macro basis are, it looks like China bet on the wrong dance partner. And that is China has been importing a lot of food and a lot of oil from Russia. And it looks like they just picked the wrong, they doubled down on the wrong guy. And in addition, I just can't, and we hate, or I should say Americans' favorite pastime is to love to hate ourselves. The U.S. just comes out of this, and the West just come out of this huge winners. We have shown that our resolve, our resources, our superior weapons, all backing the heroic Ukrainian military, without a single boot on the ground, although you could argue it's a proxy war for NATO. There have not been any American coffins coming home, or any coffins draped in an American flag coming home. This feels like masterful. And I would just personally like to say to all of these libertarians and Republicans who are mimicking Donald Trump and pretending that they love Putin, that, okay, guys, go fuck yourself. This could not have played out any better for America, and is a total testament to the unity of the West and what the West has done and pulled together here. Europe as a union for the first time. So I think you could see American markets and European markets actually tick up here, because it feels as if our enemy, Russia, has been seriously emasculated, and that our adversary, China, bet on the wrong cowboy. So what do we have? We have volatility in the food and commodities markets. We have obviously currency, specifically the ruble, which I think is already down 10% in overnight trading over the weekend. And I think you're going to see probably a little bit, and again, this is pure conjecture, in U.S. and European stocks. But who knows if this thing the third order effect would be that somehow this erupts into a larger crisis that roils the larger markets. But this really is a historic moment.
Yeah. So some analysts are saying that this would actually trigger a sell-off in the US stock market. And the thesis there is that there's going to be this renewed flight to safety. People are going to be going to, safe haven assets. I agree with you that I think this only spells a good thing for the US stock market, because my question is sort of like, well, what's safer? Like, what is the ultimate safe haven asset here? Is it treasuries? Is it gold? Is it
Yeah.
Right? Exactly. I mean, someone was saying, it's Bitcoin. Like, I mean, what could be better than getting into Nvidia right now, or as you say, Google? I mean, it spiked to 31,000, but that was before any of the news came out, and since then, Bitcoin is basically down only around a little less than 1%. It's down to around 30.5. So it appears that this actually didn't do anything to Bitcoin's price.
But why did it spike before that?
I was looking into that, and it's always the case with Bitcoin. We're always trying to figure out new reasons as to why it spikes like this. People said that there was just renewed institutional interest. My feeling is that you have all these whales and these institutions who, as soon as they make a big purchase, it moves the entire market.
Yeah.
So
who knows?
But it wasn't Russia, because that was before it happened. That's before anything happened in Russia. So my question was, if it's not US stocks, and maybe it is, what would you consider to be the safest asset that you would personally invest in if there's this sort of turmoil, market volatility dynamic that people are apparently anticipating may happen?
Well, I think the academic answer would be U.S. Treasuries, because given that we're 2/3 of the world's reserve currency and we can just print more money, it's unlikely our debt, Treasuries, would ever be in default for very long. And we can essentially, the Treasuries, despite the fact we have a tremendous amount of debt, I think the majority of economists would say if you're looking for the closest thing to zero risk, they would probably point to U.S. Treasuries. As a personal matter, my kind of safe haven, if you will, is unlevered real estate. And that is, if I wanted to build, if I thought, okay, I want to build, it's tough for me to hold cash, because the reason why cash might be a safe haven, or treasuries are a safe haven, but the fear is that you get deflated or inflated, if you will, out of existence, that you get you get negative real interest rates. They pay you, right now they're paying 5%, but usually they pay 2%, and inflation is 2.8. And so slowly but surely your purchasing power just goes away and you go broke sticking in cash or T-bills. I've always found, and again, these are famous last words, but my go-to, if you will, around what I consider, a flight to safety for me, or a safe haven asset, it would be unlevered residential rental real estate, because typically the trajectory of the markets is up. Typically with population and productivity growth, you have GDP growth, and that all spells an increase in housing prices. And if you can hold on to residential real estate for longer, say, than 10 years, and what that means is you don't lever up so you don't get caught short, if you will. Generally speaking, personally, if I want to sort of de-lever, I put money into real estate.
And so do you take this news seriously in terms of how much risk exposure, how much you're exposing yourself to risk in the markets? Like, is this the kind of event that would trigger your interest into moving into safe assets, such as residential real estate? Or is this sort of just, interesting news to you? In other words, how seriously are you taking this as a macro threat?
I've been thinking about it a lot, just because I wonder if there's an opportunity for a trade idea. So I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
When the submersible exploring the Titanic, I forget the name of it, went down and they had that massive implosion, right? So that we've all been obsessed with. I immediately thought I should short Virgin Galactic, because we're all going to begin, the market is going to take its head out of its ass and realize that rich people spending a lot of money to put themselves in harm's way is just a really fucking stupid business. And I can't imagine that everybody isn't going to, after they look away from this tragedy, they aren't going to turn to Virgin Galactic and go, what the fuck is this company thinking?
Yeah.
And guess what? That happened. It skyrocketed. The stock was up 25% on announcement they were about to commence their first commercial flight.
Yeah.
And then after the disaster, I think it lost 20 or 30% of its value because people are recognizing that a company that takes very wealthy people who are all looking for dopa hits and like to position themselves as explorers because conflate being a true explorer with just taking unnecessary risks. That's just a bad business. People have and I'm going to be clear, people have the right to kill themselves. If they want to climb to the top of Everest and take those sorts of chances, they have the right to kill themselves. If they want to go down in a submersible, in an unproven vessel, I think they have the right to do that. Or maybe they don't. Maybe there should be regulation that prohibits them. I personally believe if people want to base jump or they want to do stupid things, they have that right. But let me be clear, it makes for a really dumb business. And that was a trade. So I'm thinking, what is the trade here? And the honest answer is it isn't clear. In terms of the markets, I'm not selling. I think Russia has always punched above its weight class from a propaganda standpoint. And that is, I believe what John McCain said, this is essentially an economy. This is essentially a gas station posing as an economy. And the only reason we take it seriously is because they are very aggressive. They are very good with propaganda. And they have 10,000 nuclear warheads. It's a tiny economy that's not growing. It's a series of different people who grift off of the population and organize around grift. It's not, in my opinion, a society or even really an economy. It's a group of people who steal from their populace and essentially molest the nation for its resources. And then they fall. And then a new group of grifters comes in and fills the vacuum. But I don't see it as a player on the global stage other than what is always perceived as the nuclear threat here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you look at what's happened to the Russian economy since Putin invaded. First off, the ruble fell it dropped almost half in value. It fell around 40%, and then it rebounded. But then there have been other implications. For example, Europe is no longer Russia's top client in terms of oil exports. EU imports of Russian oil are down 90% this year. And then you look at outflows of Russian money from the Russia's domestic financial system into foreign banks. And those outflows are 5 times higher than they were before the war. Now, it feels like things could get even worse. The Russian stock index is down. But say there were a situation that resulted in a change of leadership, which it feels like that's not totally out of the question now. It's like Putin's power is as fragile as it's ever been before. What do you think the macroeconomic implications of such a change in leadership would be? How would that affect us and the world as a whole?
I think it would make for great news, but I don't think it would have as much of an impact as the headlines would catastrophize, because it's happened several times. I mean, whether it's, Yeltsin, then Gorbachev, then Putin. I mean, it's just Russia falling, so to speak, or breaking apart or reasserting its strength is just something that is not that historic, if you will. The interesting thing here is that China is probably a loser because of the immense bear hug here. A winner through all this has been India, because India has been able to take advantage of the blockade or the restrictions on importing oil into what used to be their largest customer, and that is Europe, and is getting cheap oil and cheap agricultural. And they've managed to stay somewhat neutral. And Biden, it was no accident that Biden invited Modi over and went to his yoga classes and talked about how close they want to be. Because here's the bottom line. The world was shaping up as China and Russia versus Europe and the U.S. And the swing votes, and like any election, it's the swing votes, the moderates who decide the election. The swing votes that will likely decide the future of the global economy are India and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. The GDP in the kingdom last year grew 8.5%, and that growth bested any other large economy in the world. So these two nations come out of this probably winners, because they've managed to stay somewhat neutral. Their idea is, we're going to play you off each other, and we're going to continue to do business. China is probably regretting going all in on Russia and alienating us. Our our diplomacy there, our relations are at sort of a real low. And part of that is because they have cozied up so closely to Russia. But it feels like India and the kingdom come out of this doing well. If oil prices go up, that's always good for the kingdom. China's a loser. Russia, staggering capital L loser here. And the biggest winner of all, hands down, is the U.S. We continue to march on. President Biden has made the right decisions here. And all these whack job libertarians and hard right Republicans who are Neville Chamberlain minus the charm, I think they look like idiots. I think this was stupid. Everyone's saying we needed to negotiate. All the talking points. No, we didn't. We needed to kick them in the balls, and it's working.
Do you have any anxieties about sort of, I mean, the anxieties are generally around escalation. Do you have any anxiety around escalating towards nuclear war? Do you think that you mentioned China. What do you think Xi Jinping is thinking right now? I mean, forming that alliance is sort of China's best shot at blunting America's power long term. Do you not think that maybe China has a vested interest in partnering with Putin, maybe stifling this mutiny? I mean, do you not think it could get worse from here?
China bet on the wrong horse, and I would bet they're really regretting it.
Yeah.
My guess is they're thinking, oh shit, this guy's a lot weaker and a lot less in command than we had originally thought. The idea, and there's Ian Bremer, and I'd be curious what he thinks about this, but the idea of there's always a sense of urgency to negotiate a settlement here for fear that anytime you have a land war between Russia and anybody, it could devolve to a nuclear exchange. I personally don't think that's a big risk. I think the moment they detonate a nuclear device, they lose China. First off, you have a radiation cloud that with the winds are in the wrong direction, you start getting radiation literally floating over China. So if Russia were to detonate a nuclear device, they would truly be isolated. I think someone on his own staff would kill him. There's just too many rich oligarchs who like partying in Saint-Tropez and have yachts, somewhere off of Corsica or Sicily. They would think, I'd rather just not die of leukemia. I'm not that loyal to this guy, and he would be taken out. But India, he would lose. He detonates a nuclear device, he loses all allies, all support everywhere, because that shit gets really real, really fast. And it's very hard to contain a nuclear exchange. And the thing about radiation is it's not politically correct, and it doesn't know borders, and it starts floating over the huge border that Russia shares and the Ukraine shares with other nations. So I've never thought that the nuclear threat here was as grave as people imagine. And a lot of people have consistently bowed or kowtowed too much to Russia solely because they have nuclear weapons, and everyone thought that they were capable of pushing the button. And I don't see how realistically, unless he's truly a madman, and he could be. But let me put it this way: he detonates a nuclear device. I think that is him pushing the button on his own electric chair.
And then finally, we were talking about Bitcoin. It's tough to know how the markets are reacting right now because the markets are closed and they'll open on Monday morning. We'll see what happens. But Bitcoin is the only asset.
Bitcoin trades 24/7, doesn't it?
There we go. So we can look at Bitcoin and, we talked about how it rallied to 31,000 recently occurred. And then it only pulled back slightly down around 0.8%. Do you consider Bitcoin a decent / accurate forward-looking indicator of the larger markets in general?
No, I mean, and it's proven it isn't. It was supposed to be a hedge against inflation. Inflation went crazy. It didn't appear to be a hedge there. When the markets went down, it suffered the same downdraft. It did get a bump with the SVB regional banking crisis, because people thought, okay, if the banking crisis implodes, that's good for Bitcoin. And there's even some thinking that those guys purposely caused a run on these banks because they had large holdings in Bitcoin. But no, Bitcoin doesn't appear to be a hedge or an inflation hedge. Also, Bitcoin is supposed to be a safe haven against political turmoil. This is pretty volatile. And since this crisis emerged over the weekend, Bitcoin is flat to down.
Yeah.
So, it doesn't appear to be the hedge or inversely correlated. I think it's very difficult to find correlations here. It appears that it's more correlated to the general market than Bitcoin maximalists would have you believe. Geopolitically, this is historic in terms of a case study in political power. Mm-hmm. And, I think of him as a paper bear at this point. The emperor really has no clothes here. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I don't know, more broadly speaking, if this has the same kind of impact on the markets that you would naturally think in the moment. And that's the thing about historical events, is that generally speaking, nothing's ever as good or as bad as it seems. And the market's trajectory over the long run is up because people become more productive and population goes up, and we figure out a way to do more with less. And the markets reflect that by going up in value. And whenever there's been kind of an event, if you will, if you have the liquidity, those were buying opportunities, right? Whether it was a great financial recession or 9/11, those looking back were historic buying opportunities. The problem is when it's hard to predict those things, and when they go down, it's, you usually get taken out with them and don't have the liquidity yourself. Mm-hmm. But the market now kind of likes these dips, likes so much this volatility, and waits for the buying opportunity, that the buying opportunity never comes in because there's so much capital on the sidelines hoping for a buying opportunity. So it's just a very verbose way of saying I have no idea, Ed.
Okay, Scott, and finally, Scott, do you have any general predictions for the week?
My prediction is no one has any fucking idea. I mean, the safe bet, it would be that you see a small mini spike in commodities, oil and food Monday morning, and then I would bet it kind of reverts to where it was. Obviously, there's going to be huge volatility in the currency market as it relates to the ruble. You'll see a pop in the dollar, the Swiss franc, the Japanese yen, and other safe haven currencies. I wouldn't be surprised if actually U.S. stocks, and these are famous last words, are up because, the U.S. dollar and treasuries are safe haven, but so is Google and Apple. If Russia accounts for, I would imagine, less than 1% of Apple's revenue. So it's not, and this to a certain extent is kind of gives America a chance to beat its chest and say, if there was ever any doubt about who the dominant superpower is here, or that, we are Rome and Rome is burning and we're in decline, wrong, girlfriend. What do you think? What's your wager?
I even regret asking the question because, it's like, who the fuck knows?
Who knows? Yeah, we'll see. Come Monday morning. Thank you for watching this version of Prof G Markets. Check out our pod feed for office hours on Wednesday, and we'll be back with a fresh take on markets every Monday.